So one of your favorite books is a Peter Schiff book.
Yeah, well, one of my favorite economics books is a book written by Peter Schiff, How an Economy Grows and Why It Crashes. And it's written almost like a children's book. So I majored in economics at the state-run school, the University of Florida. And one of the reasons I majored in economics is because you could take all these math classes. And
Okay.
that was always my favorite subject. But economics is not math. Economics is human action. It's why you decide to do this over that, why you decide to move to Florida and not California or whatever. It's, it is, human interaction. So I think today in the economic field, they highly complicate it into models that have no real world example. So that's kind of, that book is just kind of fun because it just kind of breaks it down to like very, very, very simple things. Like, what is money? How does an economy work? It's not a math problem.
Huh.
It's human interaction.
What is the book called?
How an Economy Grows and Why It Crashes.
I want to get that book. Danny, remind me.
We should get Schiff on to do that.
We should.
I would like to interview Schiff on that one. Maybe we can co-do that one.
We can co-do that one. I
have a signed copy of it, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
So I like Peter Schiff. Everything about him outside of Bitcoin.
Yeah. So I was the same way. So I've read a lot of his books. I followed him for years. Before I even learned about Bitcoin, I followed Peter Schiff. He was one of the people I used to listen to really get smart on sound monetary policy. But so he's a traditional and a classic gold bug. And all of his investments are super tied into gold stuff. So he's got a bias there, a natural bias there. And he would have to kind of walk away from his whole career of promoting gold as sound money. He would have to make that shift away from kind of gold being the answer to all of the economic problems to Bitcoin being the answer. And he can't make that shift.
It's ironic,
the shift
really.
Can't make the shift.
The shift. Sounds like a dance.
Shift.
I think he could. I think there are people out there who are Bitcoiners. There are people out there who are gold bugs, and there are people out there who understand both. I think a lot of the people at Bitcoin only say, well, eventually Bitcoin will overtake gold and gold will become irrelevant. But I think that we're certainly in a scenario where both are relevant and both can represent some form of sound money, depending on who you are.
We should just let the free market decide.
We should.
Allow all of them to be a competing currency and then let people decide what they want to use as a store of value or as a means of a transaction.
It's the one shame about Schiff. Now I'm saying Shift. It's the one thing about shame about Peter Schiff because he's amazing when he's not talking about Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And when he talks about Bitcoin, he's talking from a place of arguing against it.
And then he's just turned into like a full-on troll on Twitter. Like, it's
know.
awful. Like, I don't even follow him anymore because I'm so annoyed by him.
I don't mind it because I see the trolling, and I think he still offers a lot of value to Bitcoin. That's not only in sharpening your tools and your arguments for Bitcoin, but actually his understanding of the economy, understanding of the Fed, understanding of government policy. And we all have a bias. I mean, I have a Bitcoin bias. And checking your bias is really hard. And also, when you've been wrong so much about something like Bitcoin, it's very hard, I think, for someone to walk that back. He was introduced to Bitcoin when it was like a dollar by, was it by Max Kaiser or something?
I think so, yeah.
And then he had the debate with Eric Voorhees when it was, say $30. He could have made unreal amounts of money. Amounts of money. And to walk that back is very hard. But then at the same time, he's not poor.
But he could have been a lot more rich had he listened to people like Eric Voorhees and Max Kaiser back 10 years ago. It's the same. So it's kind of the same thing with Andrew Ross Sorkin, who I have a lot of respect for.
Is he the New York Times guy?
No, he's on Squawk Box. He's one of the he's gotten a lot better, I would say, in the past year. But he's very critical of Bitcoin, and I've gotten into tiffs with him on air, and it's like, what? But kind of my theory is that he was one of the first people in network broadcast news to interview Bitcoin people. He interviewed the Winklevoss in 2013, and he was like, this is, he wasn't into it, but, he missed the opportunity to buy Bitcoin. Back then, Bitcoin was like under $100. Mm-hmm. So he missed one of the most the biggest investment opportunities of his entire career. He just missed it. So why would you turn around now?
You know what I'm going to ask you to bring up now, don't you?
What's that? The salty
Yeah,
coefficient.
bring up the salty coefficient. Do you know the salty coefficient?
No.
We interviewed this guy called Craig Warnke. He's a philosopher, and he wrote a whole paper talking about how specifically people who had the opportunity to invest in Bitcoin early on and make life-changing amounts of money, specifically journalists he refers to, that because they didn't, over time they become more salty.
Yeah.
And therefore their articles become
even worse.
Yeah, more egregious. Yeah, here you go. Here's the saltiness coefficient.
Okay. All right. I see it.
And I always think Nathaniel Popper is a really good example of this because he wrote, was it called Digital Gold?
I can't remember what that book was called.
Yeah, so that's
a good book though.
Yeah, it's a great book. It's the first book I read on Bitcoin, and Nathaniel Popper has now just become, I think, almost a troll against Bitcoin. I mean, I'm not a Coinbase fan, but his piece when he went after Coinbase was just terrible. It was the most woke attack on Bitcoin and Coinbase ever. I just think, again, he probably forgot to buy some Bitcoin.
Well, I think that salty co is also going to impact politicians. So if you look at kind of the makeup of policymakers, and maybe I'll just kind of use the U.S. Congress as an example, but I think it's pretty emblematic of all like legislatures. Like today in U.S. Congress, we've got maybe 40, a couple dozen members of Congress that are like real champions for this technology. They understand it, they understand how the technology works, and they want to make sure that the US is positioned to receive the benefits of this ecosystem. And then you've got and that group is bipartisan. It's people across the aisle. Mm-hmm. And then you have a group of people who are like very strong detractors. And those are almost exclusively very progressive liberals. And that's a much smaller group. It's just a handful of people, maybe a half a dozen people.
Squad.
The squad. That's Brad Sherman, Senator Elizabeth Warren, and they are just anti this stuff. Like they hate it.
Yeah.
And then everybody else is kind of like in the middle. But how does... So this is just Bitcoin is just technology. It's no different than electricity or the light bulb or the printing press. It's not good. It's not bad. It's a technology. It's people determining how they use it is what can be good or bad. So if you use Bitcoin to
it's a threat.
Well, I mean, it's a technology. It is a technology. It's software. It doesn't have feelings. It doesn't have intentions. Right. And
but it's what it represents, which is a threat. Because is there any technology that has ever received this kind of higher bar that it must adhere to? Like yesterday, we had Nick Carter in, and we were going through the White House report that he annotated, which was not only very badly put together, very badly, the citations they used were terrible. But it sets this bar that Bitcoin or Bitcoin companies have to hit that is way higher than other companies have to hit. And that to me was one of the questions I was going to come to you with is everything we seem to do, there seems to be this very high bar that Bitcoin has to meet. And I'm trying to understand why. And I think mainly it's because it's a technology that can make people supremely rich because not only is it technology, it's a money and people feel like they missed out.
Yeah, I mean, this industry is definitely, from the regulatory perspective, I mean, there are very specific examples where we can see this industry and this asset class is held to a higher standard. And I would argue that's discriminatory.
It definitely is discriminatory, but it is also a threat.
I don't think the technology is a threat. Perhaps the people's ways in which people will use it could be a threat. So it could be a threat. So, I mean, the one thing that's so beautiful about Bitcoin is if you don't agree with the central bank economic planning regime that we're all currently under, you can peacefully opt out of that today by using this technology. So again, the technology doesn't have any intentions, but a person's intention of saying, I don't want to go to a bank. I don't really want to be subject to a small group of people deflating the value of my hard-earned money. So I'm going to choose to put everything in Bitcoin instead. I mean, how someone would use the technology could be a threat.
Which is also a very American idea. I've always seen Bitcoin as a very American idea. the values of Americans, the fact that you can opt out, that you can, I think in the UK, we're a little bit more subservient to our government. And my understanding and limited studying of the US and the establishment of your constitution was that you're a little bit more like the government serves the people. Not so much recently, which is why I think Bitcoin is a great technology in that it allows perhaps a reset of what American values. But it just feels like a very American idea. That's why I like it. That's why I like coming over here and talking to people about it.
Well, I think at its core, if you could describe Bitcoin in one word, it would be freedom.
Yes, that's very good. So what was your attraction to it? So you studied economics, but anybody who studies economics at school doesn't really study Austrian economics. They study Keynesian economics. And so when you first
I learned that on my journey. And that's so I grew up, we're in my home state. I grew up here in Florida. I'm from Lakeland, Florida, which is central Florida, very different from Miami.
You're a Gator.
I'm a Florida Gator. Went to the University of Florida.
Did they win yesterday? They played Missouri, right?
We
got
did
kicked
win
out of
yesterday. We watched the game on our phone in the car on the way up here.
Because we went to a bar to watch my soccer team, and they said we had to be done by.
So you're what team?
I'm trying to help them understand. I'm speaking the local language. Come on, man. My football team. You understand what I mean by my football team, right?
Soccer.
Yes.
Actual football where you use a foot to kick the ball.
To kick a ball.
Yes.
Yeah. No pads.
Right.
So we had to be done by 12.
Yeah.
And we were like, there's no problem. It kicks off at 10. Yeah, it's an hour and a half game. We'll be done. And then our linesman got injured and we had a 15, 20-minute delay. So a game normally finishes on 90 minutes. Ours finished at what?
It was like 110 or something.
110 minutes. And then the bar they said, look, this place is going to get busy. And it just filled up with all these young Gator fans.
Oh, you went to one of the Gator bars?
No, yeah, one of the Gator bars, but we got out.
So we have Gator, like the University of Florida Alumni Association, like in every town, you can join the Alumni Association. There'll be like a Gator bar.
Oh, right.
And the association will organize with the bar and say, we're going to invite all of our UF alumni here. We're going to watch the game together.
It must have been one of those because they even had someone selling merch and stuff.
Yeah.
They did,
Oh man, y'all should have invited me. I would have gone to that.
So they won. Well, we did. So we didn't stay. We had to come and make a show with Nick. So they won. They beat Missouri.
Mizzou. Yeah.
Yeah. Fuck Missouri. I don't even know where Missouri is. Is Missouri where they filmed that? What's that series with the lake?
The Ozarks?
Yeah,
Ozarks.
Is that Missouri?
I don't know.
Is the Ozarks Missouri?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm from Florida, not my state. But Mizzou was just brought into the SEC a couple of years ago. So the Southeastern Conference is like the dominant college football conference.
The SEC.
The SEC. Not to be confused with the Securities and Exchange Commission. That's the different SEC. But the SEC, in terms of like the revenue they bring in, it's more than all the other conferences put together. So like the Southeastern Conference like dominates college football in a huge way.
Are they paying players yet?
No, they don't play players. No, not college.
So these college people because I watched a film which alluded to this about how a lot of players that these college conferences make a lot of money, and the players help them make a lot of money, but not everyone makes it as a pro footballer, and they get injuries and yada yada. And
it's a big debate.
There's an argument they should be paid.
Well, they just changed the law to where the players can now be paid on their likeness, so they can have different types of sponsorships, deals, and things like that.
I think that's right that they should be paid.
You should pay people when they work. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Not a fan of slavery.
All right.
Not America.
We've got a coffee delivery.
Yeah, we got a coffee delivery. That's the noise.
All right, coffee break. It's 9 a.m., so we're doing coffee instead of scotch.
We can do scotch. I don't think I should do scotch after yesterday.
Thank you.
There we go. Delivered. I interrupted you. I prefer talking about sports sometimes. Sorry, I interrupted you. So you're from the state of Florida.
We were talking about my journey into Bitcoin. Okay, so we were not talking about sports. We just went on a tangent. So yeah, I went to the University of Florida, studied economics, and for me, so I was in college during the 2008 financial crisis.
Okay.
And the state of Florida got rocked by the financial crisis because a lot of it was the housing market going bust. And that's one of Florida's largest economies here. And so literally every single person I knew was impacted in a big way. Just we're a middle-class family, so nobody went hungry. Nobody was homeless or anything. But my grandmother lived with my aunt. She still lives with my aunt and uncle, and their house went underwater, and they had to move. They were completely displaced, which was very unfortunate. And they had to downsize, and have cousins, and it was just like a huge loss for them. And it was really sad to see that. The company my brother worked for went out of business, so my brother lost his job. He's gainfully employed now. Again, like everyone's fine, but seeing how this impacts real people it had a big impression on me at a young age. My parents, my parents didn't inherit anything. They worked for everything they had. Half of their life savings just evaporated with the stock market collapse. So I'm in school studying economics, reading these math books written by Ben Bernanke, who was the chairman of the Fed at the time. And me and a couple of my friends were like, this isn't explaining what's happening in our hometowns right now. And we started getting in arguments with the professors because like there was a lot of friction in the classroom. And so there was a small group of us where we said, okay, like we really do want to understand what's happening, and we weren't getting the answers in school. So we started, just searching whatever information on the internet and in the library that we could find. And the first person we found who was able to explain what was going on was this guy who was running for president. It was actually an OBGYN doctor running for president who was talking about ending the Fed and auditing the Fed. And that was Dr. Ron Paul.
Wow.
And so it was
Was
really...
he an independent at that point, or was he running as a...
He was running for the Republican nomination. Okay. Yeah, and so he had, a very large platform. Thankfully, we were able to find him, but he was able to answer a lot of questions. And if you go onto his, start reading about him and his talks, he would talk about Austrian economics. So then we got introduced to all the great writers of Austrian economics, from Mises and Rothbard, and that was the answer. And I'll tell you, the thing that was so difficult for me, that really put just a really bad taste in my mouth, was that the school didn't even bother to tell you that economics, it's not science, it's not math where there's just one answer, like 2 + 2 = 4. Like there's no other way to do that equation, right? It's a theory. Economics is theory, and there's different theories of economics, but they only teach you one, and they don't tell you that there's others out there.
And which is the one they teach you?
Well, of course, Keynesian economics.
And who does that benefit?
It benefits the current system in place.
Exactly.
And we looked into that too. We're like, why is this? And I wouldn't quote this stat, but it's I'd have to go back and look and see if I can find it. But when I did the research on it several years ago, I found that it was up to 50% of all PhD economists today, and a lot of those are working in universities and in academia or in government or other places, but about 50% of all economists working today are somehow on the Fed's payroll.
Incentives matter.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about incentives recently.
So I moved to Washington so my senior year of college,
Hold on, can we just roll back a second? So with your college professors, would this be in class or outside of class where you would challenge them? And did you specifically ask them about Austrian economics and why are you not teaching us this? Why? Because my view is, look, I dropped out of university, and the university I wasn't to was particularly great. But I look at American universities with like a certain amount of romanticism because of Hollywood, where you would see these amazing professors who would create debate within the classes and inspire their kids. And I just would always imagine if you went in, you would be in these big auditoriums where, big amphitheater auditoriums where you'd have these electric debates and they would inspire you. So I would hope you would go into one of these and you would all be there debating these issues. Did that happen?
At a Florida state-run school, and these are very large schools. So we had over 45,000 students at the University of Florida. So your first couple years, you're in these big auditoriums there's hundreds of people in your class. So you don't really get a lot of like one-on-one time to have conversations with the professor. You don't really have like those debates in the classroom, but by junior, senior year, the classes get a lot smaller. And so by senior year, they were smaller. We could have more in-depth conversations. I don't really, I mean, there was definitely friction in these conversations. I just remember us being like really unsatisfied with the answers.
So you didn't have Robin Williams' Dead Poet Society?
No, not in the public school system here in Florida. Definitely not.
That's why I imagine it's always like it. So okay, so you finished your you completed university. You went to.
I did graduate from college. The only one of my siblings that graduated from high school.
I'm the only one who dropped out.
All right.
Yeah. Okay, so you went to
so
Washington.
Senior year. So did this kind of study of what's happening in the economy. Got to was introduced to Congressman Ron Paul, Dr. Ron Paul, who was running for president, and what I learned on that independent journey of what happened in the financial system, what's going on in the economy, how does our economy work? I was very upset. And I really did not feel like the world we were living in represented the values that I was taught in my public school education. And I wanted to fight for something better. So I applied to be a White House intern. I was the only person in the state of Florida that interned in the White House that term I was there. And after that, I went to Capitol Hill and worked on the Hill. And I was fighting for a better economic and financial future. That's what I decided I was going to do with my life. I was going to advocate for a better economic policy. And I'm still on that journey today. But for the first several years, it was looking at how do we get to more sound money policies. And on that journey, I learned about Bitcoin.
So this would have been under Obama?
So I interned at the White House when Obama was president.
And so when you intern at the White House, are you actually working inside the White House? Help me understand.
Yeah, so you're in the executive office. Of course, in terms of like the physical buildings, there's lots of buildings beyond just that one White House where the Oval Office is. But you're ingrained into that. Part of what they teach you when you get to intern at the White House is how the White House works. And there's a lot of different offices, from the National Economic Council, the Office of Science and Technology Policy. That's the paper that Nick did. So that office. You have an advance team who helps organize the schedule. There's all these offices. And then you get to kind of rotate through a couple of them. And
were you pro-Obama when he came in? Because you're from a red state.
I did not come from a political family. Mm-hmm. And I would say at that time, I probably would not have been able to like truly define how I would identify politically. Today, I am a solid libertarian. I'm like a Ron Paul libertarian, which is neither Democrat or Republican. So what was
can be mildly Republican. There are some synergies between some of the ideas of Republican.
But it also has synergies on both sides. Okay. So libertarian takes pieces of Democratic politics and Republican politics.
Actually, in fairness, Lynn Alden's tweet thread the other day is probably a fair representation of that. Yeah. Okay. And when you were working there, did you become skeptical that any change could happen, or did you manage to actually achieve anything that you hoped you would achieve?
Yeah. So when I was interning granted, you're an intern, so you're just kind of like barely at the top of the iceberg in terms of what you get to do in the couple months that you're there. I would say one of the most important things I took from that experience as someone who grew up in Central Florida from a middle class family, worked for the things that I had a lot of great opportunities, though have been incredibly fortunate in my life, but being able to meet the first African-American president of the United States, and I had the opportunity to shake President Obama's hand and have a conversation with him. That was, in that moment, my biggest takeaway was that you can do anything you set your mind to in this world and in this country. If he could become the president of the United States, then me, just a girl from Central Florida, I can change the world too. And so that's still the journey that I'm on today. And today I'm dedicated to doing that through Bitcoin.
Well, I think that's a uniquely interesting thing about America. And I don't know what it is or why it works, but I've built the entirety, well, everything me and Danny have built with this podcast, the entirety is, if it's happened in the US, we've built this success and career in the US. I go back to the UK, no one gives a fuck. I've had no success in the UK. You haven't had any in Australia, but we come here and there's like, and I think what it is I think in the US, people celebrate success and they want you to win, but they want to win alongside you. I think that somewhere like the UK, like people kind of slightly resent winning and they like want to crush you and then beat you. And it is weird, but we do it with a really nice smile. We're really civil about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that maybe the socialist influence in the economy and the culture, and it's probably more the EU than the UK, although I would say the UK has more socialist policies than the United States, EU more so than the UK. But that is one of my like pet peeves when I'm debating policy with people, and you have these folks who are saying, you know, we should just socialize everything and have the government just take care of everything. I'm like, well, that is socialism. And if you're pro-socialism, you know, go live in Paris, like go live in this beautiful city and go live that socialist lifestyle. But that's not what America was founded on.
But democracy should allow change.
It should allow change, but with limited government influence.
Of course. I still think I've now experienced the healthcare system in both countries.
Yeah.
Can I tell you the differences I noticed, which will probably tell people what
All right,
happened?
let's have a healthcare debate.
Well, so no, we're not going to have a debate because I'm a terrible debater. But just so people know, you and I were meant to record an interview yesterday, and I had to postpone it because I have a thing called SVT. I've talked about it on the show before. I have these SVTs. I'm not sure if it's a condition, but basically my heart just goes a little crazy sometimes. About once a year, I have to go to hospital when it happens, just to check that I'm not having a heart attack and dying. And we had one yesterday, so I was sat there and I was getting these chest pains. I said to Danny, and then suddenly I deteriorated very quickly. My lips went cold. I started trembling, so I was like, shit, we need to go to hospital. I'm used to this, so I'm not thinking. The first time it ever happened, I thought I was having a heart attack. It was, 8 years ago. Now I'm like, oh, fuck, it's another one of these. One day it'll actually be a heart attack. That'll be the end of the show.
You'll be well practiced.
I'll be fine.
Yeah, well, yeah, and you'll turn up and it'll be Danny interviewing you.
I actually told that to Danny yesterday. I was like, well, you can interview me. He's like, yeah, no.
If I could use the cameras, it would have been on.
Actually, it's funny. So me and Jeremy were sat there in the hospital, and we actually had that conversation because there is a conversation. Like me and Danny have a plan. Like if anything should happen to me, you know, what happens to the show it's an asset which has value. Therefore, my children have an inheritance. Obviously, my son and daughter are not going to present the show. Although Scarlett would be pretty fucking awesome.
She'd be good.
So we've often talked about who would take over, and we've suggested names who could be offered the slot and host the show. But actually, Danny's now the natural successor because he's now part of the show. Me and Jeremy had that conversation and said, actually, it would be a different show. It'd be a little bit more intelligent. Danny's better on the financial side to me than me.
What Danny does.
Yeah, what Danny does.
I've been trying to poison him for ages.
but Danny isn't as funny, so it would be a bit more drive. But anyway, so anyway, I'm in hospital, and obviously I'm facing the reality as like, okay, I'm going to have to get a bill here. And firstly, I'm like, shit, did I get travel insurance? I think I've got travel insurance. So what happens is, in both scenarios, you turn up, you spend a lot of time waiting. They know most people coming in with chest pains these days aren't a heart attack. If you're having a heart attack, you are actually having a heart attack and you need resuscitation. Most people come with chest pains aren't having. Some are early stage, but aren't having a heart attack. And so they make you sit around and you get an ECG. They call it an EKG in American hospitals, even though in medical training they call it an ECG. Suddenly when you're in hospital, they call it an EKG. So they strap you up, they do a blood test, and then this is where the differences happen. The blood test in the UK, they take 3 vials of blood. In the US, they took 7 vials of blood. In the UK, you sit and wait for your blood test. Yeah, you have your ECG. The doctor says, you know, what's going on in your life, and then you go home. But here, I was given paracetamol and I was given nitroglycin. Was it, Jeremy? Mm-hmm. And I said, so in the UK, I'm not given this. And she said, yes. And funny enough, she was from Manchester. Did he tell you that?
Yeah, Jeremy told me.
And she said, yeah, the difference here is people sue you if you get things wrong. I was like, okay. And so, and then I get when I leave the UK, you just go, well, here they gave me a whole pack. And then obviously you get a bill here. So the differences are I think because our system's socialist, they want to give you the minimum to save cost. Whereas in the US, because you have to pay for medical care, I think they want to give you more stuff so they can raise the bill.
Raise the bill and also prevent reduce the risk of litigate. We are a very litigious culture. That is true, and that is not a good thing.
From the outside as well, the place was pretty gross.
The place was good. So I actually asked Jeremy that. I said to Jeremy, is this a typical hospital? He said, no, this is a bit more run down. But it was way more run down than any hospital I've been in the UK, which surprised me because my picture of America is you're paying for medical care. I assumed they'd all be like some spa hotel. Yeah, very clean.
You got to pay extra for that.
Yeah, very clean.
You have to make a big donation, get a wing built in your name for that.
So what stood out to me, but like generally speaking, the hospitals look the same, feel the same, have the same staffing issues, have the same response times. Everything feels almost exactly the same, but the money changes the incentives. We're trying to cut costs in the UK. America's trying to make money. And so I think they try. And that's another interesting thing. So when you go to a spa, you go for a massage, get your nails done, you look at the menu and you get a price list. When you have medical treatment, you just get a bill at the end. You've got no idea. You can't say, I don't want the blood test. And I still don't know. I still don't know how much my bill is going to be. I assume it's going to be about $1,000. But it could be $5,000.
Yeah. So I was in the White House the day the Affordable Care Act was signed into law, and I was there for all of the campaign work that went to get that bill passed. So our healthcare system, it's not a like free market healthcare system. Nope. It is a blend of heavy funding from government and private sector. So we're kind of in the middle, and there's the
worst of both.
Yeah, you get the worst of both. Yeah, it's not it. There are actually after that stint, I thought about going into medical school because I said like our healthcare system is broken and it'd be good to have a doctor in the family, but it's not really my interest or my field of study. But our medical system is absolutely broken.
I also think ours is broken. Yeah. But the things that stand out to me are that when I'm in the UK and I have one of my SVTs, I go to hospital, I wait, and I go home. I have travel insurance here, but if I didn't have insurance and I wasn't particularly financially secure, I can see a scenario and go, I don't want that $1,000 bill, so I'm just going to stay at home. I'm going to breathe and meditate or whatever I need to calm myself down. But there may come a time when one of those SVTs is not an SVT and I have a heart attack.
Yeah.
So that thing I don't like. And this is just a blood test and an ECG. Yeah. There are obviously other things that are particularly more expensive. And as antithetical as this is to Bitcoin, and as much as it triggers some people who are Bitcoiners, I do like the fact in the UK, anyone, whoever you are, wherever you are, you can go and get medical treatment. I think our system is broken in that there are people who can afford to pay for private medical, and they should, because private medical cover in care in the UK is amazing. It's unbelievably good. And it's cheaper than health insurance in the US. I also think there are lots of inefficiencies, but that's the part of socialism I like, is medical care for all. Because I think of a country as its resources, and some people have had a chronological benefit to accessing earlier resources, or my kids will have to worry about money less than me because of my work, and my parents too. There's a chronological benefit. There is luck. There's all these different factors, but we all build our success off the same set of resources. I do like the idea that people get universal healthcare, and I'm sure you don't.
I'm not going to advocate for socialist policies. That has been one of the biggest debates here in the United States of my generation.
What do you think the perfect system is?
I'm always an advocate of limited government. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think the government's role really should be limited to basically defense, protecting the borders, protecting our communities, having a solid rule of law. But having the government... Because the private sector, the free market, is going to be more efficient than bureaucrats planning anything or running anything.
there is that trade-off though between efficiency of private institutions and then the warped incentives of private institutions, private companies. So whereas a company who, a company is particularly more efficient, I always bring up the example of DuPont, classic case of DuPont, a company that poisoned the waters, led to the cancers and deaths to a lot of people within their communities because they're just a greedy corporation. Now, I'm kind of with you. I think we should have much more smaller and limited government, and their role is to protect communities. I think healthcare is protecting your community.
Yeah, and I think when you have, and we haven't really had this probably since the founding of the United States, because you're constantly getting more government influence as time goes on in different industries and different businesses. But I don't think we would have these big businesses, these companies that are too big to fail or to get to a point where they can cause systemic risk unless they have backing and influence by the government, unless they have regulatory capture, unless they have special agreements with the government to maybe share your information, share your data, provide surveillance of its users in exchange for being able to grow and become bigger and make more money for shareholders. So that's the crony capitalism, which is very much where we are today in the United States. And that's not the answer, and that's certainly not what I'm advocating for. I think if you go back to a true free market economy, we would have more community-driven businesses, because businesses are going to be incentivized to do the best for the people around them, for the people that they serve. And it's really hard to do that in mass. So I think you have more communities of businesses, and I think that's also led to the degradation of a lot of our morals as a society.
I actually agree with you a lot. I think you could rename it Pelosi capitalism rather than crony capitalism.
No, that would not. No, this is like Ron Paul capitalism.
No, I'm being sarcastic. But no, I can agree with you, because there's loads of examples you can see. You can see the benefits Amazon has when they try and negotiate preferential tax treatment because of the creation of jobs, which ends up eroding the local businesses there, which they can destroy. I completely agree with you. You saw it all during COVID, where large-scale companies could very quickly put in systems and ordering procedures that allowed them to operate during COVID, whereas small mum and dad businesses couldn't. We saw so many collapse.
In so many industries, we have oligopolies where just a couple of very large businesses control everything. You don't have those small community-driven businesses.
And we're also seeing the insidious influence. I mean, we saw everything yesterday with PayPal. Yeah. Did you see that?
I did.
I saw a really great tweet where somebody said, "No, I'm going to be I'm closing my PayPal account. You don't get to tell me what I can say. You don't get to steal my money. We're not China." And it was a very good tweet. But I completely empathize with you. I think I'm becoming more libertarian over time. It's just we don't have. In the UK, we don't have a culture of libertarianism. It's not something I'd never heard.
Well, it's a very small culture here in the United States. I mean, when I worked on Capitol Hill, I felt like a total freak as somebody who was advocating for, like, saying we got to do something about. 15 years ago, I was walking the halls of Congress trying to get people to coalesce around, like, we've got to do something about inflation. Nobody gave a shit about inflation 15. Like, I was like a pariah. People were like, you are freaking nuts. And today, according to one of the last CNN polls, inflation is the number one issue for American voters today is inflation. Wow. It happens very quickly, very, very quickly. And once it gets out of control, it's really hard to rein that back in. So I think this, libertarian, the idea of getting government out of everything is something that may become more popular, but I don't know. I thought there was a lot of setback during the last election when you saw all these young people get behind Bernie Sanders, who I would argue was the socialist candidate. But I think a lot of the young people were like, oh, he wants to get rid of all my student loan debt. So that's good for me. I'm going to vote for that. But that's the complete opposite of libertarian. So I don't know.
I think one of the differences as well is, like, the freedom is a very important word for Americans. It's not something we discuss in the UK. It's
not the same.
Not in the same way. But Americans will often talk about their freedoms being eroded. Politicians will. We don't really tend to talk like that. We tend to talk more about togetherness. We're collectivists.
I think we should talk about it more, though.
No, we should. We absolutely should.
Well, the
but-
people who cared about it left and came here generations ago. So the people who are still there, that's the families of the people who fought against that concept. So I think that makes sense.
But also, when you talk about it, you come across as a psycho. Like, my friends think I'm a psycho. I had a massive argument one Christmas with my brother talking about some of these issues. They think I'm a conspiracy. Like, and by the way,
Well, that was me working on Capitol Hill 15 years ago, talking about inflation.
but imagine the leap. The people who listen to my show, the Americans, they think I'm a libtard, and then in the UK, my friends think I'm a psycho conspiracy theorist. So imagine the leap to go from one to the other.
I get it.
I
get it.
I'm walking this middle line, trying to get the people of the show not to hate me and think I'm a massive socialist, whilst at the same time trying to orange pill people who they really would have an issue with. And that walking that line from one to the other is very difficult.
So when after leaving the Hill and then becoming an advocate for Bitcoin and like going back to a lot of my old friends who still work, who were still on the Hill and saying, hey, like would love to talk about Bitcoin with you. Definitely felt like a psycho back in 2013, 2014, where everyone's like, okay, I heard about Bitcoin. I heard about these meetups. What are you guys really doing? Like, are you okay? Like, what is going on?
Are you in a cult?
Maybe a little bit.
So the Bitcoiners were right. Let's just be very fair about this. I think we can say objectively they were right. They've been talking about inflation for a long time, way before these transitory 8, 9, 10.
A decade
Yeah.
before it showed up in a CNN poll.
And then here it is. We have very high inflation. We have a lot of issues in the economy. I mean, Bitcoin was born in the 2008 financial crisis. We know what Satoshi wrote in the Genesis block. And we know that everything's happened since. And they all predicted it. So what I would ask you is, there is being right theoretically, but then there's also believing that a system built on Bitcoin will actually fix these problems. Do you believe both?
So I believe this technology can address many of the systemic issues in our global financial and our monetary system today.
Right.
Absolutely. I mean, at its core, I think Keynesian economics is evil.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
And what inflation is, and this is, another thing that really upset me as I was learning about economics, understanding how these things work. Inflation is theft. Make no mistake. It is the government stealing from you.
Yep.
From its people. And if you think about that, well, what is money to most people who work for wages, just normal people, not the super rich? You work, you get a paycheck. Most people, you put it in your bank account, and then the government prints more money. So the money in your bank account that represents the hours you worked is being taken from you.
Money is purchasing power.
But so it's almost a form of slavery.
Of course. I mean, you work to earn money to buy stuff.
And then they take the money from you. It's like taking your work from you.
But
because you can't get that time back.
They double dip.
Yeah.
So they tax you.
Because they tax you too. Yeah.
They tax you, and then they shadow tax you.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I completely agree.
And so, but what when we talk about inflation today, and I wrote an article about this 8 years ago, about when we say what is inflation. So when the Fed says the inflation rate is whatever percent this month or this quarter, they're talking about the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. And so when I worked on the Hill, I actually had the opportunity. I was like, all right, I'm going to figure out what the CPI thing is, because it sounds like BS. Because when you're in school, they teach you inflation is the supply of money, how much money is in circulation, right? And so the Fed's printed like 40% more money in the past couple years since COVID. So I would argue inflation's more like 40+%. But the government will say no, it's like 4, 6, or 8. I mean, it's changing, but we've been in that range for the past couple of years. So the CPI is just it's a basket of consumer goods that people purchase. And it's a very, very big basket of stuff. It's all sorts of stuff. It's a lot of food and groceries and commodities, things consumers buy. So I sat down with a statistician at the Bureau of Labor Statistics to ask some questions like, what is the formula? And it's actually not publicly available. They won't even make it available for members of Congress and their staff.
Why is that?
Didn't get an answer on that. And then if you also look at over a period of time at the goods, as things like beef get more expensive. So previously it was a more premium cut of beef is what would be used in the formula. And then they would change it to a lesser costly cut of beef, like ground beef.
But is that, because there's two ways to look at that. You could say they've done that because they want to reduce the impact of the inflationary figures on their calculation, or you could say they've priced people out of the premium cut now, so they can't use it.
Well, we'll see. We don't know because we don't have the opportunity. The public doesn't have the opportunity to look at these formulas to really understand that. But there's definitely a lot of tools that they have to make the numbers more favorable or to manipulate the numbers. So it's really important, I think, just for normal people who don't, have the opportunity to spend hundreds of hours reading and studying Austrian economics just to know basic things about, well, what exactly is inflation? How am I subjected to it? How do I protect myself from that? How do I plan for my future? And I think that is the opportunity of Bitcoin, because it is a way to protect yourself from that type of influence, government influence in our money, which is something that's, at the end of the day, it's your work.
Yeah, so we've just made a film about inflation. Me and Danny sat down the other day to write the script for the monologues over the top. And one of the things we talked about is inflation is personal. There is no formula that can explain it or can calculate inflation for everyone, and it's a pointless number. What you spend your money on is entirely different from what I spend my money on. And actually, this is where it should get quite easy, because you should be able to create the list of things you buy, how much you spend on rent, car, food. You should be able to put that in and then calculate what your personal inflation number is. That should be very easy. And I think we would all probably expect that to come in at around 20% now, perhaps in the last year. And I think that's what we need, is your personal inflation number. Not some, this is what Eric Weinstein was talking about for a long time to us. He's like, inflation is personal.
It is. Yeah, no, that's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
People sharing that. I read, I saw a tweet not that long ago from a business owner in the EU who said it was a restaurant owner, and they said their electric bill was double what it was the month before.
That's lucky.
Almost a different issue. The whole energy thing is a whole other conversation, but
there's way worse ones than that. There was one lady who put up a thing, and her energy bill had gone from the cafe had gone from 10,000 to 58,000 or something.
You have to close your doors. You can't pay your power bill.
There are many, many people in the UK have closed their businesses because they cannot pay their electricity. They cannot afford to make their goods.
And I think that is one signal of the things that are to come. I think we're at the very, very beginning of our economic calamities globally, which is why what we're talking about, what we do, is just so important for this time.
Yeah, I need to read that Dylan Leclerc article. He's talking about unwinding the greatest bubble in history, and that's essentially what's happening. You are right. The energy thing is different. The energy problem in the UK, Danny's not experiencing that in Australia. You're not experiencing the same here. I know there are energy problems, but ours in Europe are an absolute crisis, but that is due to a lack of
bigger issues. Different set of issues.
Yeah,
it's still a result of central economic planning.
And a bit more than that. Yes, central economic planning, because we don't have energy sovereignty in the UK anymore, but also geopolitics has played into
Absolutely.
it. But it still comes down to fucking government. God, I am becoming a libertarian. We should talk about your paper.
I'd love to.
That was a long lead up to that. It took about an hour to get to that. It was fantastic. God, I could talk about that stuff all day, by the way.
The intro was an hour. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Some of the interviews are usually an hour. So you've worked on this paper. Can I pull you up on one thing?
Yeah.
Why use the term crypto? The crypto conundrum.
As opposed to Bitcoin. Well,
Yes.
just to make it relevant to a larger group of people. This paper was written for policymakers, And so to them,
They don't see the difference.
well, I think most understand the difference between Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies.
Yeah.
But many of them don't. They just loop it all in the same bucket.
Actually, Gensler does. He's one of the few people who does understand the difference. So, okay, just so people understand, because you work for the Chamber of Digital Commerce, or you run the Chamber of Digital Commerce?
I'm the founder and the CEO.
Founder and CEO. Okay, so explain what they do, who they are, and what they do.
So, Chamber of Digital Commerce, we were founded in 2014. We're the industry's first advocacy organization for Bitcoin digital assets and blockchain technologies. We represent about 200 companies across the industry. We are a nonprofit. We're headquartered in Washington, D.C., and we are the advocates for this technology in our nation's capital.
Okay, so people that listen to this show, it's what Bitcoin did. It's not what blockchain did and not what crypto did. You know what they're going to say because you've probably had the same arguments and the criticisms and yada yada. And then as a libertarian, I would say, why are you focusing on anything outside of Bitcoin? Why are you advocating for blockchain and crypto? Because Bitcoin is the thing that can fundamentally make the difference here. Crypto, blockchain isn't, I would argue.
Well, I would argue the free market should decide that.
Okay.
So the laws and the regulations governing Bitcoin and other digital assets, the laws aren't written. I mean, if you look at just for example, in 2013, it was FinCEN who wrote the first guidance for Bitcoin. And it didn't use the word Bitcoin. It used the term convertible virtual currencies, which would encompass Bitcoin and other digital assets. So, I mean, our position is technology neutral. I believe, I'm a huge Bitcoin believer. The majority of my net worth is in Bitcoin. I am a Bitcoin maximalist at heart, but I'm a free market person at heart too. And so I don't think it's the chamber's role to pick which cryptocurrencies are going to be the winners and losers. Our job is to make sure we have a legal environment that allows for the further development and investment and use of this technology in the United States. And then consumers can decide where they want to put their money.
Do you own any shitcoins?
I have...
That's a yes.
I have a small amount of other things. I've got a little bit of Ethereum.
I've got 0.25 of an ETH.
0.25 of an ETH.
Someone sent it to me and I've just never done anything with it.
Yeah, I watch it pretty closely because I think Bitcoin is different than every other cryptocurrency. Bitcoin's in its own bucket. Bitcoin's application is a store of value. And I think in terms of, there's been a lot of cryptocurrencies who have tried to compete with Bitcoin to be the dominant store of value application. Bitcoin is one. We know that 20 years, 100 years, 500 years from now, Bitcoin is the store of value. So when you look at Ethereum was built to be a smart contracts platform, but there's a lot of competition there with Avalanche and Polkadot and Solana and many others. I think we will have a dominant smart contracts system. Will it be Ethereum? Will it be something else? We don't know.
So you're an advocacy group. And I guess the work you're doing do you consider yourself similar to like Bitcoin Policy Institute and all these other people who are trying to ensure there's accurate information that gets to policymakers rather than the bullshit we see in
oh my gosh, there's
media?
So much FUD. It's so bad.
Yeah, it's
that's
terrible.
really what we launched in 2014. So we were the first group here in the United States to operate and be advocates for this technology. 2013 was the year that the idea for the chamber came together. We were coming off of Silk Road and Mt. Gox. And there were 3 hearings on Capitol Hill in 2013 about Bitcoin and Silk Road, looking at the illicit finance issues related to Bitcoin. And most people in Washington just thought that Bitcoin was the currency of choice for criminals, which like that was its only use case, was to buy drugs. It will never amount to anything more than that. Or it was dead because Mt. Gox collapsed. And that was some of the headlines back there. Bitcoin broke, it was hacked, it was dead. It's like, no, this was an exchange. This is not the technology itself. So there was a lot of misconceptions. There was a lot of misinformation. So when we launched in 2014, we were addressing a lot of those early narrative issues. And today they've evolved and they're a lot more complex. The biggest one we're looking at now is the ESG garbage of how this impacts climate issues. We argue it doesn't, but it's really, to me, it's really, as someone who worked on Capitol Hill, as someone who has been in DC my entire career, it's really important that we have industry professionals on the ground serving as a resource to our policymakers. So they're being educated by us, by people who know the technology, who work on the technology, not the media or not other groups who may have different incentives.
Okay, so you decided to write a paper on why the SEC has not approved an ETF yet. Something that's come up a lot. And actually, Bitcoiners have mixed feelings on this. Some people absolutely don't give a shit about an ETF.
Sure.
Don't want it. Some people do. The one side of the argument is that an ETF would open up the opportunity for more people to have exposure to Bitcoin. Other people would argue that it breaks some of the kind of founding principles of what how you should interact with Bitcoin. Why did you decide to write this paper? What was it that appealed to you in writing this?
When you listen to the detractors of Bitcoin in Washington, a lot of them are saying we need more investor protections. We need more consumer protections. This technology is it's dangerous. There's so many scams, and we're not going to support the growth of this technology until there's better investor protections and better consumer protections in place. So I think the whole spot Bitcoin ETF debate really exposes that Washington doublespeak. Because if you are really someone who wants to see better consumer protections for the millions of people who own Bitcoin in America today, the easiest way, the best way to provide those investor protections is to allow retail investors to have access to a regulated product, which is the spot Bitcoin ETF. So if you're saying, well, we want investor protections, but then you block the means of getting there.
Why do you think they've allowed futures ETFs but not spot ETFs?
Well, it's not logic and reason.
Nope.
I can tell you that. There's a lot of conspiracy theories that have showed up on my feed over the past month or so since we've released the paper. It's hard to say why. I mean, some of the conspiracies or theories that I've read is that the SEC knows what this would do for Bitcoin. I believe when we do get a Bitcoin ETF, and I say when because it's inevitable we will, it's just when, it's going to open up potentially trillions of dollars of buying power on Bitcoin because you have all the money that's sitting in brokerages under, financial advisors, a multi-trillion-dollar industry. There's a lot. We know there is a
wall of money.
There's a lot of pent-up demand for exposure to Bitcoin through the brokerage. And we know that because there's many other ways people are getting indirect exposure to Bitcoin today by buying things like shares of MicroStrategy, which is indirectly like a way to get exposure to Bitcoin, or buying the Bitcoin mining indexes, or GBTC, or other indirect ways to get exposure to Bitcoin. So I think the SEC knows that this would take Bitcoin to a whole new level of adoption, and they're blocking it.
So they're politicking.
It is absolutely politics.
Yeah, so Gary Gensler is an interesting character. He showed up as somebody who was educating people on blockchain. Was it at MIT? He had a course.
Yes, he was a professor at MIT.
So he turns up at the SEC, somebody who seems to clearly understand Bitcoin and clearly understand the difference between Bitcoin and Ethereum.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, he
He's very
understands the game.
smart. He does understand this at a technical level.
And assumption is, I mean, without knowing, that he has some bags of Bitcoin, I assume. And it joins an SEC with a very pro-Bitcoin Hester Peirce, who I think is a real ally to the industry in a fair way. I believe, having interviewed her and spent time with her, her belief is that she understands what freedom means for Americans. She sees Bitcoin as a freedom technology, and she believes they should have access to it. And then everything I see from Gensler is one individual who's holding back the free choice of people to buy and have access to a Bitcoin ETF based entirely on his career aspirations. That's my outside observations of this character.
Yeah, maybe. So he was asked under congressional testimony earlier this year by in Senate banking by Senator Toomey, who's the ranking member of the Senate Banking Committee. You know, why don't we have one? Or he was asked a question about Bitcoin ETFs, and his response was, and this is not verbatim, but he said he wants to have oversight of the Bitcoin markets. And if he had that, he'd be more comfortable with moving forward with the Bitcoin ETF. So first off, Bitcoin is a commodity. Mm-hmm. Chairman Gensler has said that as well. So he agrees Bitcoin is a commodity. It's under the CFTC's jurisdiction, different agency. So he's saying he wants jurisdiction over this.
So he wants the exchanges regulated under the SEC.
Yes. Yes. And only Congress can really give him the authority to do that.
What's the complexity there in that there's been people have been very clear that Bitcoin is a commodity, but shitcoins are very clearly securities. And exchanges dealing in one commodity. So you list any like Coinbase, Gemini, Kraken.
Right. So they have Bitcoin plus other cryptocurrencies. So how does the registration regime work?
A commodity, multiple securities. Whose jurisdiction is it? Multiple jurisdictions?
Yeah. So I've had the opportunity to meet directly with Chairman Gensler just in the past couple of months, as well Chairman Benham, the chair of the CFTC. So I had the opportunity to ask them privately and directly some of the conflicting statements between the two agencies, where Chairman Gensler has said Bitcoin is a commodity, but he thinks everything else is a security. And then CFTC Chairman Benham has said Bitcoin and Ethereum are commodities, and then there's many other cryptocurrencies that are also commodities without specifically naming them. So asked Chairman Gensler, so how does the private sector navigate this? And you look at exchanges who have the listing of multiple tokens, they're getting different statements from two different regulators. How do you move forward? And this is one of the most I think important regulatory debates for the industry happening in Washington today. And it's clear that the way the exchanges are regulated today is going to change.
How do you think it's going to change?
So what I understand to be, and I can't speak for Chairman Gary Gensler, but what I understand to be his agenda is he has said multiple times that the exchanges need to come in and register. But then you ask, well, register as what? Because they're not ATSs, they're not national securities exchanges. So what is how do they register? What do they register as? And so I believe he is working on building a whole new type of registration for crypto exchanges, crypto markets that will have, and he's outlined this the last time he testified in Senate banking just a couple of weeks ago. He talked about this dual licensing where you would be registered with both the CFTC and the SEC. So a lot of this is what is being built today in Washington. And there's going to be winners and losers in this process.
What does the registration mean? What is it he's trying to achieve with these registrations?
If you're registered as some type of exchange, an ATS, a national securities exchange, a crypto market, you're under the SEC's jurisdiction. So that means that everything listed on your exchange has to be registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission. So you're subject to the full disclosure regime as well as other laws and regulations. It's the whole SEC regulatory framework.
Do you think the security frameworks are helpful, or do you think we've moved on from because like the SEC rules or the creation of securities goes back like 100 years? I don't know. You'll know better than me.
Oh yeah,
Like,
almost a century.
are they fit for purpose now, or what purpose do they serve? Is this just investor protection, and do we need protection? I mean, as a libertarian, I'd assume you say no.
Yeah, I mean, from a philosophical perspective, I mean, I think we need a solid rule of law. And I think when it comes to making investments, the individual should be responsible for how they decide to invest their money. Like, I don't think the government should be involved in steering people in a direction of what to invest in or not. I think that's a personal decision that needs to lie with the individual.
Okay.
But in order for the individual to have a fair way of doing that, you need a strong rule of law. So if you have bad actors, if you have people who are lying or committing fraud, we need a way to apprehend them. We need to get that out of the system, right? So enforcement is important. And then you also need fair disclosures. So when you're investing in a company or something else, I think it's important that you know everything about that company before you make the investment, so you can make an informed decision. And so that's part of the SEC's purpose. And we detail that in the paper. We go into the 34 Act. So you have the 33 Act and then the 34 Act. The 34 Act details the role of the SEC. And at its foundation, the SEC is a disclosure regulator as opposed to a merit regulator. So a disclosure regulator, meaning the SEC is not picking the winners and losers. They're not going through all the different things that investors want to bring to the public markets and say, okay, we like this Bitcoin thing, but we don't like this Ethereum thing, so you get to go forward and you don't. That's not how the SEC was designed by Congress. Again, they get their authority from Congress. It's everyone is subject to the same disclosure regime. So if the investor meets the disclosure requirements, then the public gets to decide what they want to invest in. And so the spot Bitcoin ETF is one example where the SEC is acting as a merit regulator.
Okay.
So they're operating outside of their mandate, outside of their jurisdiction. And it's important that Congress reins this in, because if this keeps going, if they continue to act as a merit regulator, this could have implications for the entire capital markets, not just Bitcoin. Okay.
So in terms of Grayscale, I know there's been lots of applications for ETFs, but Grayscale and Barry Silbert's been very clear that he is suing the SEC. What's the status of their application, and is there any historical precedent where the SEC has been sued before and lost?
So their ETF was denied. So both Grayscale and Bitwise had spot Bitcoin ETF applications that were denied this summer.
Okay.
There's a lot of history there, and that's what we detail in the paper. But Grayscale has appealed the denial. So it is going to court. It's probably going to be a long process. It's literally just getting started, but ultimately the courts will decide if this goes forward or not, if Grayscale gets to convert into an ETF. But they're appealing on two grounds. One is a violation of the Administrative Procedures Act. So they're for the SEC is acting arbitrarily and capricious. So they're picking winners and losers. They're acting as a merit regulator, not a disclosure regulator. The Administrative Procedures Act are the laws that apply to the agencies, to the regulators themselves. You have to follow a certain process to operate or to bring new regulations or new laws onto industry. So I find it kind of interesting that the regulators are being alleged of not following the rules that apply to them as they're trying to put new rules on all of us. And then the other piece that Grayscale is appealing on is discrimination of issuers, and that they're treating the Bitcoin ETF issuers different than other commodity ETF issuers.
Which goes back to our earlier point that Bitcoin has constantly been set this higher bar in almost every area where it touches government.
Yeah, so this is a very specific example of where Bitcoin is being held to a higher standard. So you mentioned Commissioner Hester Peirce, who is, I think, serves an incredibly important role at the SEC today, because she is who's calling out this bad behavior.
Constantly calling it out. What is it she said? Like, whenever I can't remember what she says, but whenever there's a decision made she disagrees, she puts out one of those...
dissent.
Dissent, yes,
Yeah.
I dissent.
Yeah. In her dissent of Bitcoin ETFs, these denials, she has said, we are holding this industry to a higher standard. So are we going to do this moving forward with all other ETF or other asset classes? What about everything that came before it? So maybe I'll just walk through a little bit of the history of kind of what exactly I'm talking about. So in 2013, that's when the first Bitcoin ETF application was submitted to the SEC, and that was by the Winklevoss twins. Yeah.
Okay, yep.
There's the timeline right there. So when that was denied,
It took 4 years to deny it.
Yeah.
2018.
I guess so.
Wow.
When it was denied, the SEC in their denial stated the concerns of market manipulation, that Bitcoin markets are subject to manipulation. But in that denial, they outlined the path forward. And it said, but if you had these surveillance sharing contracts in place, then that would be a path to address our concern. So,
and in fairness, the markets were pretty manipulated back then, back in 2013. Although you could argue all markets are manipulated.
But is this the same way they're treating every other
I have no
commodity ETF?
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Not. It's not.
They probably are all manipulated.
Yeah.
But I just remember back in 2013, it was like it was pretty obvious what was going on.
So they wanted these surveillance sharing contracts in place. So in 2017 is when the Bitcoin futures contracts were launched on the CME. So
The top.
So when the CME launched the futures contract, these surveillance sharing agreements were in place. That infrastructure had been put in place. And so then the industry tried again after that to bring in an ETF to market. And so they had met the standard that the SEC had laid out before. And now they said, okay, we have these surveillance sharing agreements in place. Let's try again. And then they got denied again. The industry got denied again. And in the next set of denials, this is not in verbatim, but basically they're saying, okay, you don't have to just have the infrastructure to address market manipulation. You have to essentially prove the market manipulation is not happening. Again, no other industry has been told to do this.
Here's the goalpost. We're just going to put them over here.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so so then the SEC in their denials put forward kind of the criteria of how do you address this issue of proving the market manipulation isn't happening. And they said, we want to see that price discovery is happening on the CME, where the futures contracts trade, not on the Bitcoin, the spot exchanges. And there's 5 Bitcoin exchanges that make up the reference rate for the futures contracts. Kraken and Coinbase and 3 others. They're detailed in the paper. I don't have them
Gemini.
memorized on
Would it be Gemini?
memory. I think
Binance?
No, Binance is not.
Probably
in there.
Bitfinex, I'd guess.
Bitfinex.
I don't remember.
Yeah.
There's 5 of them.
Yeah.
So then the industry spent years developing the research to show where price discovery is happening. Fidelity and Bitwise both conducted their own independent studies, and they were able to show with empirical data to a statistically significant basis that price discovery happens on the CME, not on the spot exchanges. And there were 9 reports that looked at the exact same thing. One was an academic study. There was one that had a flaw. They're all in our report.
We will put it in the show notes so people can access it.
But all of that information was provided to the SEC. And then this year, Bitwise and Grayscale had their applications and they were denied. So the goalpost was moved again. So the same, because of the concerns of market manipulation is the inherent issue,
right? Okay.
The inherent concern. And then, I already stated this, but Chairman Gensler was asked under congressional testimony by Senator Toomey why, and he said, well, now I want to have jurisdiction over the Bitcoin exchanges.
That's that. Again.
Which the SEC doesn't have the authority to do that. Only Congress can give the SEC the authority to do that because they'd have to expand their jurisdiction. So,
didn't Ovik talk the other day to us about a new thing that was put in for the CFTC to have jurisdiction
of spot market oversight?
Yeah.
Whole nother conversation.
Yeah, who was it? Who's
that's the Senate Ag Committee that's introduced that bill.
All right, so it's very clear they just do you think they don't want it to happen, or do you think Gensler is just trying to play power games?
So under the previous chairman of Jay Clayton, so the companies who had the issuers who had Bitcoin ETF applications, if you talk to them, they will tell you that they believed they were going to get their applications approved.
Yeah, and Jay Clayton was he was engaging with the industry. I mean, he even come to consensus.
He was engaged. So the SEC was working very, very closely with the issuers. They were on the final details of bringing these products to market. But then the administration changed, and when Gensler took the helm, the term some of the companies has used is the Iron Curtain came down, and they were no longer in communication with the SEC, and they no longer have a path forward.
Okay, so what are the next steps? Because you're saying this is inevitable. What do you think the steps are to be getting a spot ETF approved?
So right now it's going into 2 different directions. Since there's the
legal,
the Iron Curtain at the SEC, and the SEC, it seems pretty clear they're not going to move forward. So now it's going to the courts and it's going to Congress. So Grayscale is the first to initiate a legal action, and the courts will weigh in. And then the other avenue.
Sorry, on that, how independent are the courts on this kind of issue? Are they politically influenced, or are they completely independent?
Well, they're supposed to be completely independent.
I'm aware of that, but is there any, like I say, is there a historical precedent with the SEC being sued, and has anyone been successful?
I assume so. I mean, I haven't documented every legal case against the SEC, but in terms of our industry, I don't think so. I think in our industry that hasn't happened yet. Okay,
and then the other path is
Congress, because all of the SEC's authority comes from Congress. So Congress could pass a law changing the direction that the SEC has taken.
Is there any action? Is there any bills that are being considered for this?
So we have shared this report today with 100 different members of Congress, and we are getting bipartisan support across the aisles.
Great.
I have both Republican and Democrat members who have said they believe this is an injustice and they want a spot Bitcoin ETF to come to market. And so there are pretty significant efforts brewing in Congress to bring oversight to the SEC and to get this to market as soon as possible.
Do you think there's any potential that a spot ETF for Bitcoin, while good for American investors, is potentially not good for Bitcoin? And let me explain where I'm coming from with this. A wall of money, as we've talked about, could come in for Bitcoin. But ideally, Bitcoin is decentralized. We want mining to be distributed around the world, but we also want ownership to be distributed around the world. We don't want to have large pockets of centralized Bitcoin. Is it 40% of Bitcoin mining now is in the US? Did we know that?
So, yeah.
this now, when 40% was in China, people talked about this a lot. Now it's 40% in the US, people are talking about it less.
I'm not sure it's that high.
I think it might be. Can we find that out, Danny? But either way,
Right, you don't want centralized pockets of people holding other people's Bitcoin.
yeah. But also, would it be, if Bitcoin is like, as people believe, will be the future money of the world? I don't know the answer to this, but is there a risk not only to Bitcoin, but would it create a disparity?
So Cambridge estimate it's 37.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Is there
As of December 21.
Yes, it's probably higher now. Is there a risk in that there is a disproportionate held by America? Say 50. I wouldn't even know what the concentration of ownership. I wonder if you can find that out.
That'd be hard.
If a wall of money came into the US, you could talk about a large, very significant percentage of Bitcoin is held in America by Americans or American institutions. And I wonder if that's ultimately good, or it doesn't matter. I don't know. I don't know the answer.
Well, the United States is the largest economy in the world today. A lot of the world's wealth is here in the United States. So I think that's more just emblematic of how, different economies are kind of dispersed today.
But that has negative. There's negative consequences for other nations. That the high price of the dollar at the moment, and dollar being the global reserve currency, that causes problems for other countries, not just
That's
dollarized
the
countries.
Exorbitant privilege.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. So I just wondered, like, if an ETF brought a wall of money, I don't know. There'll probably be some smarter people than me who can write in and understand this and say it doesn't matter. But I just wonder if that creates some kind of disproportionate.
If too many
power.
Americans hold Bitcoin.
Not too many Americans hold Bitcoin, but too much of the total amount of Bitcoin is held by. I think every American should hold Bitcoin, but I want every Bangladeshi to hold Bitcoin, and every Indian and every English person.
And I think the point is that it wouldn't be every American holding Bitcoin. It'd be one company holding Bitcoin, and everyone has exposure.
So,
and who has that exposure? Is it just rich people again get exposure?
Right.
Like I want the little, like we want to close the wealth divide. One of the areas that I'm really interested in. We've been trying to introduce more progressives into our show, because it doesn't matter whether you're conservative, libertarian, or progressive. Bitcoin is getting exposed to a wider group of people, and a lot of FUD comes from the progressives. So we've been trying to get more progressives on the show to defeat the FUD. And one of the areas that you can use that is actually, progressives hate the wealth divide. They blame billionaires, but actually what they don't understand is a lot of the policies they advocate for makes the wealth divide worse. One of the things about Bitcoin is reducing the wealth divide. So ideally, Bitcoin would reduce the wealth divide, but would an ETF be counterproductive to that? Because it exposes, like, who uses an ETF product? Is it people with money already?
it's retail investors. That's who this would benefit. In my opinion, a spot Bitcoin ETF, the biggest benefit would be for the retail investor.
Well, what is the demographic of retail investors? Is it middle class? Is it middle to upper class? Is it? I don't.
It's everyone that's not an accredited investor.
But who's in that retail class of not accredited investor? Because
just the normal people.
But normal people can be anything from lower, like
it's
low
a mix.
to middle. But I don't know that mix.
It's wage earners. It's wage earners. It's mostly people who have a job that comes with retirement benefits and 401ks.
Yeah, that would be an interesting demographic.
So it could be everything from a school teacher that makes $30,000-$40,000 a year. It could be someone who.
But they can already buy Bitcoin.
You can. So absolutely. So you can buy Bitcoin directly through going to an exchange. You can go to a famous Bitcoin meetup. You don't need an ETF to buy Bitcoin. But the challenge with that is that in order to understand how to safely navigate through an exchange to buy Bitcoin today, you have to do some research. And there's a lot of landmines out there. There's a lot of frauds in this space. If you don't understand just how the technology works, if you lose your keys, like, you're screwed. And so for some people who want to go down that path to understand how this works, they should be able to buy Bitcoin directly and self-custody. So this is for everybody who's not willing to do that. Or a lot of people, when they make investments, they do so through their financial advisors. They have separate money that's set aside. It's their savings. It's what they invest to protect their purchasing power. And they have professionals who have a fiduciary responsibility to oversee those funds. And so this opens up an opportunity for that money that's set aside in retirement funds, managed through brokerages, to invest that directly in Bitcoin. So if you want to buy Bitcoin today, you can't do it through your financial advisor. If you go to your financial advisor and say, I've been reading about Bitcoin and I want to allocate, part of my savings to this. Can you go make that for me? They say, we can't help you with that. I can't even talk to you about it. I'm not allowed to. You have to go do that on their own.
But isn't that a good thing? That we encourage people to do the work. We encourage people to understand what Bitcoin is, to understand what a node is, to understand private keys. If we make it too easy, do we potentially risk weakening Bitcoin?
I think in a strong and a healthy economy, you have many options and you allow the individual to pick which option is most appropriate for them. So what about,
Come on, we're all lazy. We'll end up picking the easy option.
Well, not everybody. I mean, you didn't. I didn't.
I didn't have the choice.
And when it comes to spot Bitcoin ETFs in the United States, we're behind because there are ETFs trading all over the world today. So the US typically is the first to bring new innovative products to market, but when it comes to Bitcoin, we're not. And so we have spot Bitcoin ETFs that are trading in Canada, in Germany, Switzerland, and many other places. And we can look at what those demographics look like. And today there have been no reported instances of hacks or thefts or things going wrong.
Oh no, I understand.
Concerns.
I understand that, but at the same time, not your keys, not your Bitcoin. Thank you, Andreas. It's a very important flag for Bitcoin. We talk about that a lot.
I agree.
We talk about managing private keys. Now, look, I empathize with what you're saying. My dad, there is zero chance he could buy, store, and protect his private keys. If you listen, Dad, I'm really sorry, but you're rubbish. He can barely use a remote control. So I get it. And
there are going to be people who either don't have the means, don't have the capabilities, or don't have the time or the interest.
But the solution for my father is that I do it for him. And I manage his private keys.
But you can't manage everybody's private keys.
No, but I can do my father's. I manage my children's private keys, and they're gradually being educated. And at some point, I'll hand their private keys to them. But I'm only challenging you because this is what other people will bring up. I see the benefits of both sides. But whilst we want to advocate for a strong economy and advocate for the expansion of Bitcoin, also we should be advocating for a strong, decentralized, robust Bitcoin and a community that manages its private keys. And I worry that an ETF warps some of that.
Well, and
that is somebody knowing my net wealth will take a massive leap if there's an ETF approved.
Yeah. Well, again, in a strong economy, you have lots of different options. That also includes lots of different Bitcoin ETF options. I think it would be detrimental if you only had one.
Yeah,
if only one company moved forward. I think there should be, and there's been 16 companies in the US issuers who have applied for a spot Bitcoin ETF. So you want many different options. You want strong disclosures so investors can make those decisions. And for those, and this could be the first step for a lot of people. It's like going and managing your own private keys. That's like swimming in the ocean. Well, a lot of people are afraid of the ocean because they can't see, they don't know, but they're more comfortable getting in a swimming pool. So like the Bitcoin spot ETF is like getting in a swimming pool. You get comfortable with the water. And then once you're comfortable and you start learning about it, then maybe they'll be more comfortable jumping in the ocean and managing their own private keys. But I think it is important that we have many different options for many different ranges of people because we are a very diverse economy. Mm-hmm. And again, the government coming in and saying you can't have this or you can't have that, that's not the role of the regulator.
That's fair.
And we need to ensure that they are operating within their mandates and their authority, because if that goes unchecked, that can have significant consequences for society.
Being the first approved ETF has a massive advantage.
Absolutely. We saw that with the Bitcoin futures
Yeah.
ETFs.
All the I mean, I can't remember who the first one was, but I know everyone which followed it. When you compared the trading volumes, they were significantly.
It was
lower.
over $1 billion.
Yeah. So, do you think when we finally get to the point where one is approved, they will have to approve them all at the same time?
I sincerely hope that the SEC is organized enough to have a fair process in place to say, okay, the industry's been working for a decade. There's 16 companies who have tried to do this. We need to come up with a process to ensure that we do this in a fair way and we don't create a Bitcoin ETF monopoly.
Because that is the risk.
And so one of our advisory board members is Paul Atkins, who was an SEC commissioner. And we had the opportunity to talk to him. And he was there when the first gold ETFs were brought to market. And it was a similar kind of situation where there was one company who had been working for years to bring one to market. And then several years later, there were a few more who went, and just the way that the timelines worked out, it was one of those companies who kind of came in at the tail end and they were going to be first. And Paul said, wait, we can't just let this company go first when there's another company who's been working for years with us to get all the infrastructure in place. And so they came up with the process to bring them out in a fair way. So I sincerely hope when this moves forward, there is a process to ensure it's done in an equitable way for the issuers.
Well, if somebody wants to know more about this.
This is a critical on-ramp. So in 2013, a critical on-ramp was unleashed, and that was Coinbase. We saw the Coinbase effect. 2013 was a massive bull market for the industry, because before there was Coinbase, you had to go to like Mt. Gox to buy Bitcoin, which was not a great place.
Local Bitcoins.
Or you had to go to like a sketchy Bitcoin meetup and do this whole dance in person. Definitely not the safest way to do anything. So this could be the ETF will have another effect. It's a way to open up an on-ramp. So the more on-ramps, the more ways we have for people to get exposure to Bitcoin, the better. I mean, it's the same thing with...
I'm still going to challenge that. I think the more ways we have people to access and hold private keys, the better.
But you got to meet people where they are too, because that is a big leap for a lot of people. And it's putting a lot of expectations and the same expectations on everybody. And I think we've got to meet people where they are if we want them to go on this journey with us.
I still challenge it, but like I understand what you're saying, but I still challenge it. But okay, fair enough. So I'm just conscious of time. If people want to learn more about this, where would you send them to?
So this paper is available for free download on our website at digitalchamber.org. This is one very specific example where I think we've been able to really highlight where this industry is being treated differently. But this issue is happening across the entire federal government. You're seeing it in AML laws. You're seeing it in the tax laws. You're seeing it in a lot of the legislation pending before Congress today. I think these policy fights for Bitcoin, this is the fight of my generation. And I think it's absolutely important that we as Bitcoiners and people who care about this technology understand these political fights, these legal fights, because if we get the policy wrong, it can totally skew our future, and it's going to have an impact on how people have access to this technology. So we're really fighting for fair access, so everybody can participate in this peaceful opting out of the central economic regime. And you see this in all areas of law. And this is a very significant undertaking for any organization. But that really is the purpose of the Chamber of Digital Commerce, to be on the ground, to understand these legal fights, to understand these policy fights, and to fight for the absolute best laws possible for the industry.
You just made a trailer there with your last about 1 minute that we could put out to advertise this, which was brilliant. That wider conversation, I think that's a whole new podcast, and I think we should do this again.
Yeah, I'd love to.
We will be back around January time, and I would like to sit down with you more again. I'd like to expand on that at the start of the conversation we had as well, because I think that is super interesting. Perianne, this was fascinating, and I really appreciate coming on. We will direct people to the Digital Chamber of Commerce. direct them to the paper, direct them to yourself. But some people are lazy and don't check the show notes. Are there any specific addresses you want to send people to?
So we're active on Twitter at Digital Chamber, or my personal is at Perianne DC.
Okay, we will share those in the show notes. Good luck with this. This was a fascinating chat. And hopefully we'll sit down and do this again soon. And sorry about yesterday.
Yeah, no worries. I look forward to it.
Thank you.